this is a relevant topic here in the United States, and that is Mexican Americans that don't actually speak Spanish. I think especially there's people that are younger than me, maybe in their early 30s or 20s or younger. Everybody in their family is Mexican, but they don't actually speak Spanish. And I'm hearing that that's a new trend that's happening. So let's go back in time to when your grandparents came on the train from Mexico. And
yes.
That was, you said around 1910 is when you said?
Yeah, the early 1920, early 1920s.
They only spoke Spanish.
Yes, they only spoke Spanish.
But what I'm a little unclear on is, so my grandma, so she did speak some Spanish? I'm confused on that.
She did. She was when her brothers, since she had 3 older brothers, and when they went to school, they did not know any English. Everything spoken at home was all Spanish. So they had a really tough time going to school, couldn't communicate. You didn't have programs at the time, and they had a difficult time. But by Grandma having the 3 older brothers, they were helping teach her English. So she didn't have that difficult time. So she learned the English language by the time she went to school. By the time she went to school, she knew it, so she didn't have to go through that. And she was she was able to go to school and communicate. And so then Spanish was spoken some at home. But then Grandma's, that's where I was going with that. Grandma's father, he took the classes, so he learned how to speak English. He was fluent, so when I could communicate him in English, and he could speak English, he could speak Spanish. But my grandmother, it was Spanish, and then it was broken English. So everything was broken. You can kind of get a word here and there and communicate that way.
So at some point, so my grandma. So your mother, let me put it this way. At some point, your mother and your grandfather were both bilingual.
Yes.
And they kind of became that way. I guess one of the things I'm wondering then is at what point did your mother stop being equally bilingual and the Spanish fades away and English becomes more prominent? When did that happen? Was that before you were born?
Yes. Yes.
Because I never heard her speak one word of Spanish that I can ever remember.
Because she would speak Spanish when she was talking to her mother on the phone. And then that was all totally Spanish, like when I was younger. And then as I got older, the Spanish started fading away. It was more English. But yet, crazy as it seems, I picked up and I knew what Grandma was talking about. And so I knew what she was talking about. And so if there were things that she didn't want me to know, and then she was talking, and she'd get off the phone, and I would say, oh, well, I didn't know so-and-so, so-and-so. And it was like some personal juicy gossip.
And that was when you were still just a little girl?
Oh, yes. I was little. I was like 6 or 7. And I said, well, why is that one sleeping with that one? I mean, it was juicy stuff. And Grandma...
She shouldn't have... that.
Grandma was just like, oh, I didn't know you understood what I was talking about. It was some juice in the family.
Yeah.
But after that, she knew that Spanish did not cover it up. That she had to be very careful what she said on the phone, because even though I didn't speak it, I knew I could understand it. I could understand. There was Spanish, there was some English words, in there, and it was just like, oh, and I knew by the tone it was gossip. It was juicy.
So, but then at some point you stopped understanding it then, right?
I always that would have been after my grandmother passed away, and I didn't hear the Spanish.
Because that was your main source of it.
That was the source, yes. So that would have been I was 11.
Okay.
I was 11. So at that point, heard it a lot. And kind of hear bits and pieces when my Aunt Jenny would come. And, she didn't want us to know what her and Grandma were talking about. So they would speak Spanish.
And I do remember some of that when I was a boy. I remember they'd go into the kitchen and I didn't understand. I didn't know if they were speaking Spanish or what, but they just spoke so low that I couldn't understand what was going on.
Yes.
And there was always something that was being said that everyone else couldn't know about. Every single time.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's a cultural thing or not. But
Always secrets. Always.
yeah, it was like everybody's in the living room, everybody's having a good time catching up, and then like an hour and a half into it, the exodus to the kitchen, some kind of secret conversation.
Yes.
And I would be a kid thinking, what are they talking about? But ultimately not really caring. But
yes.
I don't know if that's cultural, if that was just the family.
Oh my goodness.
Every time.
Yes, I hated that. It was always like, they were talking about something, I can't know about it, but you're doing it in front of us. You're just going to another room. Yeah, is that, I don't remember that.
That's a good question for people watching. Maybe they'll.
I don't remember that thing happening on my Italian side of the family. So, I mean, we were in Wisconsin on the Italian side.
It seems on that side, on the Italian side, it's more like if you got something to say, you just say it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that definitely is a difference there culturally. But I mean, that's just my perception of it, but that's how I feel.
We were all together and Grandpa would open the bottle of wine and, come on, salute, and, and you just kind of laugh and carry on and enjoy
No secrets.
enjoy each other. No secrets. No one was hid in the kitchen telling stuff. But yeah, that's...
You did say though that there was time you had the uncles, the Italian uncles that would come by, and they'd always have some kind of business going on that you didn't quite always understand. Right?
The one Italian uncle that he was he dealt with a pawn shop or something. So yeah, he always brought stuff, and then Grandpa enjoyed buying.
And they was always wearing suits though, right?
Oh yeah, they always had suits on. Always had suits. Yeah, the black coat and the hat and decked out.
And what decade would that have been? The 1960s?
The 1960s. And so then Grandpa would say, no, that he wasn't going to buy anything this time. But then my uncle, his nickname was Skunky. Uncle Skunky. Skunky would come in.
What do you have to do to earn that name, man?
And he had the watches and the bracelets and everything. And so Grandpa would look at all that and just, he always ended up buying. Always ended up.
So speaking on that then, in the same way that you could understand Spanish, could you understand Italian at all or not so much?
No. It was, there was a similarity. There was a similarity, but no, I couldn't quite make that out. Kind of a,
But it was a very similar situation that those grandparents, well actually neither of them really spoke English. Well, you only had one grandparent that was still alive.
Yes, that was still alive.
And he very broken English.
Broken, yes.
So you didn't have a source that was bilingual enough to help you to really kind of.
Well, if some of there was some of Papa's siblings that spoke Italian. There were some of them that I guess maybe it was the older ones, the ones that picked it up, but Papa didn't.
And I think it's interesting too with how this all worked out is that because even though they were first generation Americans, having parents that only spoke either Spanish or Italian, their main language was English, and then they met and married, and then that's where we come from. And I always have been very aware of, well, if they still mainly spoke Italian and Spanish, good chance they would have never met, none of this would happen. Like English was that common language that made them Americans as far as that goes. And I think it's interesting to think that, especially when we were starting this conversation about Mexican Americans now, especially ones that mainly speak English and not so much Spanish, I would have to think there's some part of your identity that passes in that new generation because that's part of your culture. You speak Spanish, and now this newer generation doesn't, but you're still a Mexican American. So I think that's interesting. But it's like, but there are certain benefits and ways you can progress your own life. If you're living here and English is your main language, it's got its advantages too. I mean, even in careers, I mean that because Papa did well with what he did for a living, and
yes.
So it is interesting that how speaking English helps, but then also that part of your culture and identity, I'm sure, from the old country fades away, and your own parents and grandparents from there, they see that they want better for you than they had, but they also realize that part of that culture is traded along with that exchange. So, good conversation. Let's keep it going. There's a comment section for you right here.